The aisle jammed without warning. A ripple of bodies stalled, then locked, like a chain reaction nobody controlled. Salvatore Moretti's shoulder clipped a seat back as he stopped short. The smell of recycled air pressed close. A phone chimed. Somewhere ahead, a woman hissed, "Oh my God," not loud enough to be polite. Then Sal saw the knees. They were planted on the carpet between rows 14 and 15, square and deliberate, the way a man sets something down when he intends to leave it there. Not collapsed. Not slipping. The posture drew a straight line from the knees through the spine to the back of the neck. Calm. Centered. The kind of stillness that makes movement around it feel foolish. A flight attendant stood a step away, hands folded tight at her waist, jaw set. Behind her, a supervisor leaned into the aisle, voice clipped, words falling into the cabin like loose change. "Sir, you were instructed." Phones rose. Screens tilted. The moment caught fire. Sal didn't move. His hand stayed on the strap of his carry-on, knuckles whitening as the press of passengers bumped and apologized and bumped again. He didn't look for an open seat. He didn't look away. He watched the kneeling man lift his head. The face came up into the cabin lights and the years peeled back. Vincent Caldero. The name didn't cross Sal's lips. It didn't need to. The recognition struck like a muscle memory, fast, involuntary. The jawline, a shade leaner now. The eyes unchanged. Still measuring, still empty of panic. The same eyes that once read rooms before anyone else felt the temperature shift. Vincent didn't plead. He didn't argue. He listened. When the supervisor finished, Vincent nodded once, slow enough to be unmistakable, then stayed exactly where he was. The supervisor glanced down at him, then over his shoulder, then back again. The words started up once more, sharper now. The cabin leaned forward to hear. Sal felt it, the collective breath held, the appetite for a fall. He stayed still. In another life, this would have ended differently. A raised finger. A name dropped. A quiet correction delivered to the right ear. The aisle cleared because it understood who was walking through it. Not today. Sal's eyes tracked the small things instead. The way Vincent's hands rested flat on his thighs, palms down. The way his shoulders didn't roll inward. The way he didn't once glance at the phones. He knew what was happening. He knew exactly how permanent this was. The supervisor stopped talking. A beat passed. 2. The cabin noise crept back in, seatbelts clicking, someone laughing too loud again, a child kicking a seat. "Sir," the supervisor said, voice lower now, "if you'll just comply." Vincent rose. He did it smoothly, no hurry, no scrape of knees on carpet. He brushed invisible lint from his trousers, a neat, practiced motion, and stepped into the aisle as if he had all the time in the world. For a fraction of a second, his eyes lifted past the supervisor, past the attendant, past the wall of faces. They met Sal's. It wasn't a stare. It wasn't a challenge. It was acknowledgement. A receipt signed and filed. Then Vincent turned and walked forward, leaving the aisle to knit itself back together behind him. Sal took his seat 3 rows back. He didn't fasten his belt right away. The safety video flickered to life, soundless beneath the cabin's murmur. He watched Vincent's shoulders move toward the front, watched him disappear into the galley, watched nothing happen. No security. No raised voices. No escort. The plane began to breathe again. Sal buckled in. The engines spooled. The cabin lights dimmed. As the plane rolled, Sal adjusted the cuff of his suit and glanced at his reflection in the window, creased, composed, invisible. He reached into his jacket and slid his phone out without looking. One message sat unread. He didn't open it. At altitude, the attendants moved through the aisle with carts and practiced smiles. A drink paused at Sal's elbow. He shook his head once. The ice rattled on. He waited. Vincent never passed his row. When the plane touched down, the seatbelt sign chimed and the aisle surged forward. Sal stayed seated as bodies surged past. He watched the galley again. Vincent did not emerge. Sal stood last. In the terminal, light spilled across polished floors and advertisements promised calm. Sal walked against the flow and stopped short at the edge of the concourse. Vincent stood near a window, coat on, phone to his ear. He laughed, soft, brief, then ended the call and slid the phone away. He didn't look back. Sal didn't follow. He took 3 steps, then 4, then veered toward the restroom. He washed his hands and dried them carefully, watching the mirror the way he used to watch doors. When he stepped out, his phone vibrated once in his palm. Unknown number. No text. No missed call. Just the vibration, timed too neatly to be chance. Sal slipped the phone back into his pocket and walked on. He didn't speed up. He didn't slow down. He passed the windows where planes lifted and banked, silver and clean, and kept moving until the concourse bent and the light changed. Behind him, somewhere above the terminal, a camera kept rolling. By the time Sal reached the parking garage, the city had already decided how the story would be told. He felt it in the air before he saw it, an edge, a hum. Tires hissed over concrete. A horn snapped. Someone laughed too hard. Sal crossed between pillars painted with fading numbers and stopped beside his car. He didn't unlock it right away. He checked the reflections first, a black sedan idling 2 rows over, a man tying his shoe near the elevator, a family arguing about directions. All ordinary. All useless. His phone vibrated again. This time, it rang. Sal answered without lifting it to his ear. Yeah. Silence on the line. Not dead air, presence. A breath, controlled, patient. Don't hang up, a voice said finally. Older than Sal remembered. Thinner. Still unmistakable. Sal leaned his shoulder into the pillar and watched the idling sedan pull away. You're late, he said. I wasn't invited, Vincent replied. Sal smiled without warmth. You were buried. So they said. Sal waited. He let the pause stretch until it became work. He listened for traffic, for footsteps, for anything that would force the moment forward. Vincent didn't rush him. They put your name on a stone, Sal said. Closed the books. Paid the priest. I know, Vincent said. I approved the wording. Sal exhaled through his nose. He pictured the cemetery in Connecticut, the quiet plot, the flowers that arrived twice a year like clockwork. He pictured the man kneeling in an airplane aisle, steady as a monument. Why the plane? Sal asked. You don't do sloppy. I needed you to see me small, Vincent said. Public. Recorded. That's not small, Sal said. That's loud. Only to the wrong people. A car alarm chirped somewhere deeper in the garage. Sal unlocked his door and slid into the driver's seat, closing it softly. He didn't start the engine. Say what you called to say, Sal said. Vincent did. Not with words. Sal's phone chimed, a message this time. No sender ID. A photograph loaded. Grainy. Old. A storefront in Pennsylvania, windows boarded, sign half torn away. Sal recognized it immediately. He'd signed the lease himself under a name that no longer existed. That place burned, Sal said. Yes. Years ago. Yes. Another chime. Another image. A ledger page, yellowed, a thumb holding it open. Sal's thumb. The cuticle scar visible. That book's ash, Sal said. Most of it. The engine next to Sal's car turned over and rolled past. Sal watched it go, then focused on the windshield. You don't have that, he said. If you did, I'd know. I know what you'd know, Vincent said. That's why I kept the parts you wouldn't look for. Sal felt the pressure move, not spike, not explode, shift. A quiet redistribution of weight. He adjusted the mirror and caught his own eyes. Still calm. Still there. What do you want? He asked. Vincent didn't answer immediately. When he did, he didn't say a thing Sal could grab onto. Do you remember the rule about ghosts? Sal did. You don't chase them. You don't talk about them. You don't prove they're real. You're breaking it, Sal said. So are you. Sal closed the message thread without replying. You humiliated yourself, he said. That buys you a minute. Maybe 2. It bought me your attention, Vincent said. The rest I already own. Sal started the engine. The dashboard lit up, familiar and obedient. You don't own anything that breathes, he said. Not anymore. Check your calendar, Vincent said. Tuesday night. Boston. Charity dinner. Sal's grip tightened on the wheel. He didn't look down. He didn't need to. He knew what was on that calendar. He knew who would be there. He knew what money moved through that room and how carefully it was dressed. You won't be, Sal said. I already was, Vincent replied. I left early. The line went dead. Sal drove out of the garage and into traffic. He didn't take the highway. He cut through streets that used to know him, past restaurants where the waiters still nodded without thinking, past storefronts that had learned to keep their glass thick. He parked beneath an overpass and killed the engine. He pulled the calendar up. The entry was gone. Not deleted, shifted. Rescheduled without a trace, like it had never been there. Sal scrolled back, then forward. He checked the backup. Empty. He dialed a number he trusted because it had never failed him. It rang twice. I need eyes, Sal said when the call connected. Now. A pause. On what? On me, Sal said. On everything that says my name. Another pause, longer this time. That's a lot of ground. I'm paying for speed, Sal said. The call ended without a goodbye. Sal sat with the engine off, listening to the city work. Somewhere above him, trains rattled. Somewhere behind him, a siren rose and fell. He pictured Vincent at the window in the terminal, the laugh that meant nothing, the call that ended before it began. A third message came through. Text this time. No image. I don't want your seat. Sal stared at the words. I want the rule you broke to keep it. Sal typed a reply. Deleted it. Typed again. Deleted that too. He put the phone face down on the passenger seat and closed his eyes for a count of 5. When he opened them, a man stood at the edge of the overpass, watching traffic. Ordinary jacket. Ordinary shoes. He met Sal's gaze and nodded once, like they shared a joke. Then he turned and walked away. Sal started the car and pulled back into the flow, the city folding around him like it always had, tight, familiar, and suddenly unforgiving. By morning, the city behaved as if nothing had happened. Sal watched it prove the point from the back corner of a cafe in Massachusetts where the coffee tasted expensive and the chairs were meant to discourage lingering. Men in tailored jackets spoke softly over pastries. A woman laughed at the wrong moment and recovered quickly. A waiter recognized Sal, hesitated, then decided not to. The room kept its balance. Sal didn't. He folded the newspaper without reading it and slid it aside. His phone lay face up this time. No messages. No missed calls. Silence that had weight to it. At 9 on the dot, the first thing broke. The cafe's TV, muted, captions crawling, flickered to a local business segment. A smiling anchor gestured toward a graphic about a redevelopment project in Pennsylvania. Sal leaned back, eyes narrowing. He recognized the address before the caption finished typing it out. The storefront from the photograph. The one that burned. The Chiron changed. Ownership dispute delays opening. Sal stood, left cash on the table, and walked out before the segment finished. Outside, the air had teeth. He crossed the street without looking for traffic and unlocked his car. He didn't call anyone yet. He drove. He took the long way to the office, past a dry cleaner that used to wash cash out of coats, past a dentist's office that never kept records longer than a year. He parked beneath his building and rode the elevator up alone, watching the numbers climb. Inside, his office looked exactly the way he'd left it. Desk clean. Blinds angled just so. The framed photograph of his father fishing, smiling like he'd won something small and honest. Sal set his jacket down and opened the safe behind the painting. The envelope on top wasn't his. It was heavier than it looked. He slit it open and poured the contents onto the desk. Receipts. Not copies, originals. Ink pressed deep enough to bruise the paper. Dates circled. Margins annotated in a hand he hadn't seen in years. Vincent's. Sal didn't sit. He gathered the papers and burned through them standing, cataloging damage. Connecticut. New Jersey. A quiet route through Minnesota that had never been written down. A loan he'd forgiven on paper but never in practice. The door opened behind him. "Boss." Sal turned. The man in the doorway, Eddie, had started with him at 19, sweeping floors, asking questions at the wrong time. He didn't ask now. He took in Sal's face and closed the door carefully. "Phones are weird," Eddie said. "Calendar too." Sal nodded once. "Who touched it?" Eddie hesitated. That was answer enough. "Get me a list," Sal said. "Who had access?" "Not suspects. Access." Eddie moved. Efficient. Loyal in the way that mattered until it didn't. The second thing broke before noon. A call from a banker who smiled through problems for a living. Sal took it on speaker and listened to apologies stack like furniture. "Temporary," the banker said. "Compliance issue." "What compliance?" Sal asked. A pause. Papers shuffled. Legacy exposure. Sal ended the call. By 1, a restaurant in New Jersey cancelled a private room without explanation. By 2, a supplier in Connecticut asked for cash up front like it was a favor. By 3, a man in California who'd been late on payments for 6 months wired the full amount with a note that read only, "No hard feelings." Sal stood at the window and watched traffic chew through the afternoon. He didn't shout. He didn't throw anything. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he'd sworn off after a funeral that never made the papers. "Boston," Sal said when the line answered. "Tonight." "That's tight," the voice said. "Then make it tighter." He hung up and pulled his jacket on. The dinner was black tie and soft hands. Money moved through the room like perfume, noticed only if it was missing. Sal shook the right hands, nodded at the right moments, let his name settle into conversations where it belonged. He felt the absence before he saw it. Vincent wasn't there. Instead, a seat sat empty at a table near the stage, placecard printed, untouched. Sal passed it once, then twice, then a third time. No server approached it. No guest asked about it. The chair waited. Halfway through the auction, Sal's phone buzzed. "Unknown number. You're late," the text read. Sal didn't reply. He raised a paddle and won a watch he didn't want. The applause came and went. The chair remained empty. After dessert, a man Sal didn't recognize slipped into the seat. He wore a cheap tux well and smiled at the wrong people. He caught Sal's eye and nodded, then pushed the chair back and stood, leaving a folded program behind. Sal waited until the lights dimmed for a speech before crossing the room. He took the program and unfolded it in the hallway. Inside, a single line was written in pencil. "You closed the books. You didn't close the door." Sal stepped back into the ballroom and let the noise swallow him. He left without saying goodbye to anyone. The third thing broke on the drive home. His phone rang once, then died. Not the battery, the signal. Dead zones followed him like weather. He pulled over beneath a bridge and restarted it. The screen came back with a list of missed calls that hadn't existed a minute earlier. Eddie. The banker. A number Sal didn't recognize but felt in his chest. Vincent. Sal drove without headlights for a block, then turned them on. He didn't check his mirrors. He knew better than to look for what wanted to be seen. At his building, the doorman greeted him by name and held the door too long. Sal nodded and moved past, the echo of his footsteps chasing him to the elevator. Upstairs, the apartment smelled wrong. Clean, but not his clean. He stopped short of the living room and listened. Nothing moved. He crossed to the bar and found the bottle of whiskey shifted an inch to the left. On the counter, a note lay weighted by his keys. No handwriting this time. Typed. Neat. Disappearing costs interest. Sal sat down slowly, the room settling around him. He picked up the keys and turned them over in his hand, counting the scratches. He looked out at the city and saw routes instead of streets, faces instead of windows. He understood it then, not the plan, not yet, but the price. Vincent hadn't come back to take. He'd come back to charge. Sal woke to sunlight slicing through the blinds, sharp lines across the floor like a trap laid in light. The apartment felt heavier than usual, shadows pressed into corners where they shouldn't have been. He didn't move immediately, just sat on the edge of the bed, leather jacket draped over the chair, eyes tracking the dust motes. His phone vibrated on the nightstand. Unknown number. You broke the rule. Sal let the words sit. Not a threat. Not a question. A statement. A weight that didn't need embellishment. He pulled the sheet of paper from the previous night off the bar and stared at it. Typed letters, precise. Disappearing costs interest. He thought about what it could mean. No ledger, no bank, no accountant could translate it fully. Only Vincent. By 10, he was in the office. Eddie met him at the elevator, folding his hands like he knew what was coming. "They're asking questions," Eddie said. "You know the rules, boss. You ignore them at your own risk." Sal didn't respond immediately. He walked past the desks, past the old filing cabinets, past the worn couch where deals had been made and secrets kept. He paused in front of the bulletin board, hands brushing pins and strings left from months ago. A map of the city, routes marked, contacts circled in faded ink. "The rules?" Sal finally asked. Eddie's eyes didn't flinch. "Institutional binding. You think it's all paper and money. It's not. You broke it when you disappeared." Sal ran a hand through his hair. The flight. The airport. Vincent humiliating him in plain view. The images flashing in his head. That act wasn't just theater. It was a declaration. And now, it had consequences. "What's the cost?" he asked. "Not what," Eddie corrected. "Who? You've bound yourself. By law. By tradition. By the game they never explain until it's too late." Sal crouched over the map, tracing lines he had drawn years ago. Routes through Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, safe houses, dead drops, shell corporations. Each one a potential liability now. Each one vulnerable. A chime from his computer. Another message. Tuesday night. Boston. You keep the rule. Or you pay. Sal clenched his fist. He knew Boston. A gala where politicians, financiers, and discreet players mingled. The room was a living ledger. Every handshake, every glance, every bid recorded in someone's memory. And now, he had to attend. Not because he wanted to. Because he had no choice. He called Vincent's number. Silence. He tried again. Nothing. Eddie leaned against the doorway. "You think it's about you. It's not. It's always been about the rule. You follow it, or it breaks you." Sal exhaled and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He thought about all the rules he'd bent, broken, ignored. And now, one he didn't even know existed had snapped around him like a noose. By evening, he was on a train heading toward Boston, blending in with commuters who didn't know anything about ghosts, ledgers, or rules that charged interest for absence. He carried only what he needed, a briefcase, a clean suit, and the memory of a man who should have been dead but wasn't. The train lurched. Sal closed his eyes, listening to the rhythmic clatter. Somewhere, a conductor called out a stop. Somewhere, Vincent's shadow waited. Somewhere, a rule long ignored was about to collect its debt. And Sal knew, as the city sped past the window, that nothing, not money, not loyalty, not silence, would save him if he failed to act. The institutional trap wasn't a threat anymore. It was reality. The first ripple of unease turned into a wave as he approached the station. Every passenger, every bag, every glance could be an agent. Boston welcomed him with open streets, and he realized the city itself had already taken sides. He stepped onto the platform, and for the first time, Sal felt the weight of being invisible yet entirely exposed. The rules weren't abstract. They were living, breathing. They were waiting for him to make a choice. And somewhere in the crowd, Vincent was watching. The real question was, who would blink first? Sal's car moved through Boston streets like a shadow slipping between lamplight and darkness. The city smelled of wet asphalt, fried food, and old brick, an aroma that reminded him of deals made in basements, promises whispered over whiskey, and the quiet tension before a gunshot. He parked a few blocks from the gala venue, careful to avoid cameras, crowds, and anyone who might recognize him. The night had already begun. Strings of golden light draped the streets, reflecting off slick cobblestones. He adjusted his cufflinks and ran a hand through his hair. A minor detail for someone like him, but control mattered, even in the smallest gestures. The first anomaly appeared the moment he stepped toward the entrance, a woman in a red coat, leaning against a lamppost, watching him as if she knew the exact line he would take. Sal froze. The woman didn't move. She didn't smile. Her gaze carried weight, a presence that belonged to someone who could either warn him or condemn him. He let her watch for a moment, then stepped forward. Inside, the gala was chaos dressed as elegance. Politicians smiled too brightly, bankers nodded too knowingly, and every handshake carried a ledger no one would ever see. Sal moved along the edges, observing, calculating, and waiting. A man in a tailored suit approached. His handshake firm, eyes sharp. "Salvatore Romano," he said, voice smooth but with an edge. "We've been expecting you." Sal nodded once, allowing the man to pass. He didn't ask questions, he knew better. Boston had its own rhythm, and entering it without permission was a mistake he couldn't afford. Then he saw the seat. Empty. A small placard bore a name he didn't recognize. But the weight it carried was immediate. Not a guest. Not a politician. Not a financier. A shadow. Someone, or something, representing the rule he had broken. Sal approached the bar to order a drink. As he lifted the glass, he noticed movement in the reflection behind him. A man, or someone dressed like one, stood a few tables away, observing him. Every time Sal blinked, the figure shifted, keeping pace without being obvious. He didn't panic. He had survived worse. But he felt the trap tighten, the institutional binding wrapping around him. Every conversation, every glance, every toast in the room reinforced it. He was here, whether he liked it or not. A server handed him a folded note with a flourish that suggested importance. Sal opened it, unfolded it, and read 3 words. "Rules are watching." He scanned the room. Faces blurred into anonymity, but the weight of the message pressed into him. Someone, Vincent or his proxies, was moving pieces in a game Sal had barely noticed. Every table was a chessboard. Every handshake a check. Then, from the corner of the room, he caught a familiar movement. The woman in red from the street, she had entered unnoticed. She carried herself with precision, elegance, and something sharper beneath the surface. Not a threat, exactly, but a force. Sal felt it instantly. Proximity alone made the air heavy. She didn't need to speak. Her presence alone reminded him that the rules weren't abstract. They were embodied, watching, waiting. He moved toward the staircase leading to the private balcony. The gala's music swelled, and he counted the exits silently, mapping paths, noting cameras, memorizing every potential cover. On the balcony, the woman finally spoke. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Voice low, controlled, like someone who had rehearsed every word for this exact moment. "And yet I am," Sal replied, eyes scanning the crowd. "You're following me." She smiled faintly. "I'm not following. I'm enforcing." The words landed like stones. Sal's instinct screamed. This was more than a warning. This was a test. Suddenly, the lights in the main hall flickered. Murmurs rose. A glass shattered somewhere below. Sal's hand went to his jacket instinctively, not for a gun, but for the envelope he had kept close, the one detailing every route, every contact, every vulnerability. The woman's gaze locked onto his. "You broke the rule," she said. "And now it's your turn to pay." Sal didn't flinch. He didn't smile. He simply studied her, noting the exact position of her weight, the tilt of her head, the way her fingers curled around the railing. There was power there. Control. A code he didn't yet understand but would have to follow. And then the first ripple of chaos hit. A waiter dropped a tray. Someone shouted. Cameras captured the wrong angle. The music stopped abruptly, leaving the room suspended between celebration and panic. Sal realized he had stepped fully into the institutional trap. Every exit now mattered. Every decision could trigger a consequence. The woman in red stepped back, letting the distance between them speak. She had made her point, he wasn't alone, and he wasn't in control. Sal inhaled slowly, the city's lights stretching out below, and knew that the next move had to be precise. One wrong gesture, one delayed decision, and the price of breaking the rule would become very, very real. The game had begun, and Boston, with all its unseen eyes, was the board. Sal's mind raced as he stepped off the balcony back into the gala hall. The music had returned, soft jazz now, but it felt wrong offbeat, like the city itself was mocking him. Every polished smile and raised glass now carried weight, suspicion threading through every interaction. He knew someone had been tipped off. Someone was watching him, waiting for a misstep. The woman in red remained at the edge of the room, unmoving, a sentinel. Her presence was a quiet warning, but her eyes told him more than words ever could. She wasn't here to negotiate. She was here to see the rules enforced, and Sal was the one under the microscope. He moved toward the bar again, keeping his steps slow, deliberate, unremarkable. But even unremarkable drew attention. A man in a black tie lingered nearby, pretending to sip champagne, but his eyes were locked on Sal, tracking every gesture. Sal recognized the type, an enforcer, the kind who made sure debts were collected and mistakes punished. He reached the bar and touched the glass, just enough to make it seem natural. That's when he felt it, a small envelope tucked under the coaster. He slid it into his jacket pocket without looking, but his fingers brushed a folded note inside. The handwriting was neat, almost elegant. "You want control? You'll pay for it." Sal exhaled through his nose. He had expected threats, but this was more intimate, a personal challenge. He scanned the room, mapping exits, noting who could interfere, who could assist. Everyone here was both observer and participant in the same game. Then, chaos erupted. A scream, sharp and sudden, cut through the music. Sal turned. On the far side of the room, a man fell, a glass bottle shattered against the floor, its contents spilling like blood. Guests froze, unsure whether to panic or ignore. In that instant, Sal saw the opportunity and the cost. To assert control, he would have to act, and someone would inevitably pay. He moved, swift, decisive. The enforcer in the black tie approached, confident, but Sal's hand found the edge of the folded note. Inside was a keycard. Not just any keycard, a pass to a restricted level of the building, a space only insiders and VIPs could access. He pocketed it and gave a small nod to the woman in red, acknowledging the unspoken understanding. He knew the game, and he was willing to play. A whisper of movement behind him drew his attention. One of the gala staff, an older man with nervous eyes, was backing away from the scene. Sal grabbed his arm, firm, unyielding. "You know where to go," he said, voice low but commanding. The man nodded, trembling, and led him to a service elevator hidden behind a wall panel. The elevator ride was tense, each floor passed marked by quiet groans of the old machinery. Sal's thoughts raced. The keycard would grant access to the private offices above, but he had no guarantee the rules or the woman in red would allow him free passage. Every step upward was a gamble, every pause a potential trap. The doors opened onto a dimly lit corridor, pristine and silent, the kind of place designed for deals made in whispers. Sal slipped the keycard into the lock of a polished door at the end of the hallway. The click echoed, final and resolute. Inside, he found files stacked meticulously on a mahogany table, records of transactions, debts, ledgers, every violation documented. And in the center, a small glass case containing a single item, a watch, engraved with initials he recognized immediately. It wasn't just any watch, it was Vincent's, the symbol of his authority, a tangible reminder of what Sal had once feared. He reached out, hand hovering. The rules were clear: take it, and he would become a participant, willingly stepping into the enforcement mechanism. Leave it, and the woman in red would escalate. Sal exhaled, knowing the first sacrifice had to be made. His hand closed around the watch. In that moment, power shifted. The room, the city, the game all bent slightly toward him. Outside, a storm had begun. Rain pelted the streets of Boston, tapping against windows, masking footsteps, erasing traces. The first move had been made, but Sal understood instinctively, the game had just begun. One choice executed, one sacrifice made, and the cost of the next step would be higher. He looked toward the balcony, toward the woman in red, who remained silent, watching, waiting. The institutional trap was no longer abstract. It was here, breathing, alive, and Sal had just invited himself deeper into its grasp. For the first time that night, he smiled, not for relief, not for victory, but because he knew the stakes. He was fully immersed. And the rules would demand more. The night had grown heavier in Boston, thick with the smell of rain-soaked brick and the faint hint of burnt rubber from delivery trucks racing through empty streets. Sal walked along the perimeter of the gala's back garden, the city lights reflecting in puddles like fragments of a fractured sky. He wasn't alone, the woman in red followed, silent, keeping distance yet never out of sight. Every decision, every step he had taken had led to this point. The files he had seized, the keycard he had taken, the watch he now carried, all of it had shifted the balance. But with each acquisition came the awareness of how precarious his position truly was. A single misstep, a single glance, and the game could turn lethal. The garden was quiet now, the music of the gala fading behind the thick walls of the venue. Sal paused, running a hand across the wet railing, feeling the chill seep through his jacket. He thought of the choices that had brought him here, not just the tactical ones, but the moral compromises, the moments he had looked away while others paid the price. Every advantage had come with a shadow, every gain with a cost. The woman stepped closer, her eyes softer in the dim glow of the garden lights. "You think you're in control," she said, voice calm, almost compassionate. "But control isn't just about power. It's about knowing who you are when no one else is watching." Sal exhaled slowly. She was right. He had measured influence, wealth, fear, but he hadn't accounted for integrity, courage, or the quiet moments that revealed true character. For a fleeting heartbeat, he allowed himself to pause, to consider not just the moves he would make against rivals, but the person he wanted to be when the dust settled. And in that pause, a subtle thought crossed his mind, a reminder that even amidst darkness and power struggles, moments of reflection matter. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought against enemies, but against oneself. If you're listening now, take a moment too. Think about the choices you make, the line between ambition and conscience. If this story has struck a chord, made you pause, question, or feel, show that it matters. Like this video if it resonates with you, subscribe if you believe stories like this should be told, and leave a comment sharing what you would have done in Sal's place. Stories like these survive because people care, because someone sees the weight of the decisions and chooses to remember. The reflective moment passed, replaced once again by the relentless tension of the night. Sal adjusted the watch on his wrist, feeling the weight of both its metal and the responsibility it represented. Every step back toward the gala was calculated, every glance over his shoulder a silent warning. The enforcer in the black tie had not forgotten him. The woman in red still watched. And somewhere above, unseen, the rules themselves pulsed like a heartbeat, ready to claim what was owed. Sal knew one truth: the tipping point had arrived. The choices he made in the next hours would define more than his power, they would define his legacy, the measure of loyalty, and the cost of crossing the invisible lines drawn by those who ruled from the shadows. Rain-slicked streets awaited him, shadows lengthened, and the city watched. Sal stepped forward, aware that every move now carried irreversible consequences. And in the quiet, he whispered to himself what he hadn't dared before: "I'm ready for the cost." Sal's heart pounded against his ribs like a warning drum. Boston's alleyways seemed to twist unnaturally in the storm, the streetlights casting fractured shadows across wet bricks. The gala had been a distraction, a lure. Now, the real test had arrived. From the corner of his vision, he spotted movement too coordinated to be random. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, lean, silent, and armed not with guns, but with intent. Their presence was deliberate, each step calculated to corral him. The first barrier of the institutional trap had snapped. The rules were no longer abstract, they were hunting him. Sal didn't hesitate. He pivoted toward the nearest alley exit, sliding the watch into his jacket pocket as if it could shield him from what was coming. Rain splashed his face, cold and biting, but he ignored it. Instinct took over, every sense heightened. A sharp whistle split the night, and the woman in red appeared at the alley's mouth. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The tension between them was unspoken, but electric, alliances unspoken, boundaries tested. She had warned him earlier, yet here she was, neither fully ally nor opponent, her motives a prism of loyalty and duty. The first attacker lunged. Sal sidestepped, his jacket brushing the glistening wet bricks, and spun into a narrow passage. The man recovered faster than expected. Another figure appeared from the left, blocking the way, forcing Sal into a calculated retreat. Each step felt like a negotiation with fate, every heartbeat a countdown. Sal realized the assault wasn't random, it was strategic. Someone had anticipated his moves. The watch he had seized was the bait, the first move in a larger trap. And now, every decision had to be precise. One wrong move, and it wasn't just his pride or freedom at stake. It was his life. The woman in red moved with him, silent, graceful, a shadow guiding him through the chaos. Yet the subtle glances she threw made him aware, she didn't fully trust him. And he, in turn, couldn't yet trust her. The divide between them, loyalty versus duty, necessity versus desire, was growing more palpable with every passing second. Suddenly, a deafening crash from above drew their attention. A balcony, weakened by the storm, collapsed into a side street. Splintered wood and shattered glass rained down, forcing the attackers to scatter momentarily. Sal seized the moment, darting toward a narrow stairwell leading to a service tunnel below the street. As they descended, the chaos above sounded like a distant war. Sirens approached, their wail masking other noises, but Sal knew this wasn't about law enforcement, it was about control, about the unseen enforcers who operated above the law. In the relative darkness of the tunnel, Sal finally allowed himself a breath. The wet, cold air clung to his skin, but it also brought clarity. Each step he took was deliberate, measured. He had survived ambushes before, but this one felt different. The stakes were no longer abstract. Betrayal, power, and survival converged into a single, tangible threat. The woman finally spoke, her voice low and deliberate. "You're learning too slowly," she said. "This city doesn't forgive mistakes." Sal turned to her, his eyes hard, reflecting both rain and determination. "I don't need forgiveness. I need to survive." Her gaze sharpened, as if piercing straight through him. "And what about loyalty? Integrity? Do they matter when rules are enforced from above?" Sal didn't answer immediately. He knew the question wasn't just about the city or the enforcers, it was about him, the choices he had made, and the line he was willing to cross. The rain outside hammered the ground, mirroring the tension within him. They emerged from the tunnel into an abandoned courtyard. The city above seemed oblivious, unaware of the power struggle unfolding in its shadows. The woman in red stepped back, allowing him space, yet the invisible tether between them remained taut. Sal's gaze swept the surroundings. He had survived the ambush, but the divide was now unmistakable. The woman in red wasn't a guide, she was a mirror reflecting the cost of ambition, the fragility of alliances, and the depth of the choices he would be forced to make. Above them, Boston slept, or pretended to. Below, the shadows whispered secrets, waiting for the next move. And Sal realized, with a cold certainty, that the assault was only the beginning. The city had claimed its first piece of him, and it would not release him willingly. He adjusted the watch again, feeling the weight not as metal, but as responsibility. Survival was no longer a matter of instinct. It was strategy, perception, and endurance. And the divide between necessity and desire, loyalty and survival, was only widening. Sal stepped forward, into darkness, ready for the next challenge. And he knew, deep in the marrow of his bones, that the game was far from over. Sal moved like a predator through the abandoned warehouses of Boston's waterfront, the rain now a steady drumbeat on the corrugated roofs above. Shadows stretched across crates and shipping containers, creating a labyrinth where enemies could strike from any angle. Every step he took was measured, his senses alert to the faintest sound, a shifting footstep, a whispered command, a metal latch sliding. The woman in red remained just behind him, silent, her presence both reassuring and tense. Sal knew she was calculating every possibility, weighing him, testing him, yet unwilling to fully reveal her intentions. In moments like this, alliances were fragile, friendship or betrayal could pivot on a single word or glance. Ahead, a dim light flickered in the corner of the largest warehouse. The enforcers, the ones who had orchestrated the ambush, were waiting. They were armed, organized, and ruthless. But Sal carried something they didn't anticipate: the information from the files, the leverage of the keycard, and a mind sharpened by months of strategy, deception, and survival. The first shot rang out, not a bullet, but a warning flare that lit the warehouse in scarlet. Sal crouched behind a crate as others emerged from the shadows, weapons ready. Rainwater pooled around his boots, cold and grounding. The smell of wet wood and metal filled his senses, anchoring him in the present. Every instinct screamed caution, every muscle tensed for the inevitable clash. The woman in red moved beside him. "You've survived the first wave," she whispered. "Now we see if you survive yourself." Sal didn't respond. Words were worthless here, action was everything. He lunged toward the nearest container, using it as cover while silently assessing the distance between him and the attackers. One misstep, one hesitation, and this confrontation would end with his body in the mud and blood mixing with the stormwater. Time seemed suspended as the first clash erupted. Metal clanged against metal, shouts echoed, and rainwater hissed as bullets ricocheted across the floor. Sal's movements were precise, honed by countless nights of preparation and the constant shadow of betrayal. He neutralized two attackers with swift, calculated force, sending them sprawling into crates. From the corner of his eye, the woman struck with lethal efficiency, her movements fluid, decisive, and terrifying in their precision. Sal realized in that moment she was more than an observer, she was his equal, his mirror, and perhaps the only ally he could truly trust. Amid the chaos, Sal caught sight of the mastermind behind the ambush, a figure masked in darkness, whose presence exuded authority. This was the one who had pulled the strings, who had dared to challenge him directly. Sal's chest tightened, the culmination of weeks of strategy, subterfuge, and sacrifice now hung on a knife edge. The two adversaries circled each other, eyes locked. Sal advanced, every step deliberate, every muscle coiled. The figure struck first, a swift movement designed to disarm and dominate. Sal parried, countered, and seized the moment, sending the opponent sprawling across the slick floor. The warehouse echoed with grunts, crashes, and the relentless patter of rain above. And then, in a sudden, almost surreal calm, the woman placed a hand on Sal's shoulder. "Remember why you're here," she said softly. "Not just for power. Not just for survival. For everything you've lost and everything you refuse to lose again." Sal's mind flickered to the dual wounds that had brought them together, the grief, the betrayals, the losses that had shaped their choices. He understood, finally, that victory wasn't only about defeating enemies. It was about confronting the cost of power, the price of loyalty, and the measure of character in a world that offered neither mercy nor respite. With renewed resolve, he lunged at the mastermind again, this time with a clarity born of desperation and understanding. Every strike, every movement, was precise. Every feint, every counter, told a story of survival, of strategy, and of the bond forged in the fires of adversity with the woman in red. The final moment came abruptly. The mastermind faltered, a slip in judgment born of arrogance. Sal struck decisively, disarming and subduing him. The storm outside seemed to pause, holding its breath. Silence descended over the warehouse, broken only by the distant drip of rain. Sal looked at the woman, rain mingling with the sweat and grime on his face. She nodded, a quiet acknowledgement of what had been accomplished and of the truths that had been revealed. They had survived the night, but the confrontation had left scars deeper than any wound could show, the realization that in a world of power and betrayal, trust was earned only through shared danger and sacrifice. As they stepped out into the storm, the city skyline looming in the distance, Sal understood one final truth: the game was far from over. They had won the battle, but the war for loyalty, integrity, and the reclamation of self was only beginning. He adjusted the watch on his wrist, feeling the weight not as a symbol of authority, but as a reminder of the price paid, the choices made, and the path forward. The woman in red moved beside him, silent, unyielding, a tether in the chaos of the city. Boston was still alive, watching, waiting. And Sal knew that what came next would demand everything: strategy, courage, and perhaps, the willingness to sacrifice even more. Dawn came quietly, almost apologetically. The storm had passed, leaving Boston washed clean, streets steaming faintly as the first light slipped between buildings. Sal stood alone at the edge of the harbor, the water dark and calm, pretending nothing had happened beneath its surface the night before. His jacket hung open. The watch rested heavy on his wrist. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. Behind him, the city began to wake, delivery trucks, distant horns, footsteps on wet pavement. Normal life returning. That was always the cruelest part. The world never paused long enough to acknowledge what it demanded from men like him. The woman in red approached without sound. She no longer kept her distance. There was no need. Everything that could be said between them had already been proven in action. She stopped beside him, eyes on the water, posture relaxed in a way that suggested the danger was over but not gone. "They'll say you won," she said quietly. Sal didn't answer. Victory was a word used by people who didn't understand balance sheets written in blood and silence. "They'll also say you crossed a line," she continued. "Some will fear you for it. Others will test you." He finally turned to her. "And you?" Her gaze met his, steady. "I'll watch." That answer carried more weight than any promise. The institutional machine had already begun to adjust. Phones would ring before noon. Meetings would be called under harmless pretenses. Names would be removed from ledgers. Others would quietly rise. The assault at the waterfront would be explained away as something else, an accident, a misunderstanding, a rumor no one could quite confirm. Sal had disrupted the order, but he hadn't destroyed it. That was the truth no one ever wanted to admit. You didn't escape the system. You either fed it, or became part of its spine. He walked away from the harbor and into a private office overlooking the city, one that hadn't been his before last night. The door closed behind him with a soft, final click. Inside, the space was sparse. No photos. No trophies. Just a desk, a chair, and a window that framed Boston like a chessboard. Saturday. For the first time in hours, he allowed himself to be still. The losses came back then. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. The people who hadn't made it. The relationships that had thinned into shadows. The moments where he'd chosen leverage over mercy because hesitation would have cost him everything. This was the price no ledger tracked. A knock came at the door. One knock. Respectful. Controlled. The woman entered and placed a slim folder on the desk. "Your name is being spoken carefully now," she said. "That's how you know it worked." Sal opened the folder. Inside were options. Fronts. Routes. Names. Paths forward that didn't require chaos but demanded restraint. Power without noise. Control without spectacle. He closed it. "And if I refuse?" She studied him. Really studied him. "Then someone louder will take your place. Someone crueler." That was the final truth. The moral test never came with clean hands. It came with consequences that didn't care about intentions. Sal leaned back, eyes drifting to the skyline. Somewhere out there were people who believed strength meant dominance, that survival meant becoming harder than everyone else. He knew better now. Strength was knowing when not to strike. Survival was choosing which parts of yourself you were willing to lose and which you would protect at all costs. He stood and extended his hand. Not as a command. As a decision. The woman in red took it. Briefly. Firmly. Outside, the city continued its rhythm, unaware of the quiet recalibration happening behind glass and steel. The rules hadn't disappeared. They had evolved. And so had Sal. As he adjusted the watch one last time, he didn't look at it. He didn't need to. He already knew what it represented. Power taken can be lost. Power enforced can be challenged. But power restrained, that's what endures. The door closed again. Not with finality. With intent. And somewhere in the city's endless hum, a new question began to circulate, unspoken, unresolved, dangerous in its simplicity. What kind of man would Sal become next? The answer wasn't written yet. And that uncertainty was the most powerful thing of all.